Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Global Health Security Agenda Next Generation Network's monthly webinar series. My name is Dr. Taylor Winkleman. I am the Deputy Coordinator, and it is my distinct honor to introduce to you Dr. Corrie Brown. Dr. Corrie Brown has a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine, a PhD, and is a diplomate of the American College of Veterinary Pathologists, is a Josiah Meigs Distinguished Professor, and also a University Distinguished Professor at the University of Georgia, where she teaches in the College of Veterinary Medicine. She holds a DVM from the University of Guelph and a PhD in Comparative Pathology from the University of California, Davis. Dr. Brown has worked internationally in building animal health infrastructure and diagnostics for most of her career, conducting workshops on basic field necropsy and diagnostic techniques in multiple countries. She has authored 4 books on transboundary animal diseases and field diagnostics in resource-poor settings. Dr. Brown has served on many national and international expert panels about animal health and has received numerous awards for her efforts, including the American Veterinary Medical Association's International Award, a Fulbright Award, and a Student AVMA National Teaching Award. She is happiest when working with the next generation of the veterinary profession, and as a member of the veterinary profession, I can say that we are happiest when she is working with us. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Corrie Brown.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Winkleman, and thank you, Dr. Hoyle, for everything that you're doing with this network. You're accomplishing so much, and I thank all of those who are online and who have joined this webinar to learn a little bit about food security. So we will talk about global food security. Well, what does it mean? I feel there are many misunderstandings and insufficient knowledge about what actually constitutes global food security. So we're going to go over some of it. Do we have enough food? Will we have enough? If we actually look at projections of where we will be, right now we're 7.6 billion people in the world. And in 2050, there's going to be more. Scientists have looked at this as to how much food we're going to need to feed all those 9.8 billion people. And you know, the scientists they can't agree. So are we going to need 60% or are we going to need more than 100%? Well, either way, it's a lot more. And this problem of food security is not going away. Not only that, it will likely increase. So we're going to answer some questions today about food security. And those questions are, what is food? And what is meant by food security? Who suffers the most from food security and where are they? And what are the root causes? And as we go through this, I'm likely to add some personal anecdotes based on my work in various parts of the world. So first we're going to talk about what is food? Well, we all need nutrients to survive. And we take those nutrients in the form of food. And it can be of plant origin, or from my perspective, I'm a veterinarian, I work with food producing animals. It can be of animal origin. And we're going to talk more about this importance of animal origin food or animal source foods, what the aid community sometimes calls ASF, animal source foods. And we're going to find out how important those are for food security. Okay, yeah, so what is food security? Well, here's a definition from the UN Committee on World Food Security. Basically, it's if you have access to safe, nutritious food and you have enough of it so that you can lead an active and healthy life. Well, food security is hard for people to understand in the developed world. I live in the developed world, and this is my reality. So I go into the grocery store, and it looks like this. I have huge choices, and there's always plenty. Am I going to get the artichokes or the avocados today? Am I going to get the chicken or the pork chops? And so on. You get the idea. There's a huge range of what we have to choose from. Also, when I leave the grocery store, it's not a very big dent in my pocketbook in terms of what the developed world spends for food compared to many in the developing world. So here are some costs of the percentage of income that people pay for the food that they consume. Well, in the United States, we spend 6.5% roughly of our income buying food, as long as we don't dine out. So that's all food eaten at home. That's not very much. We're so lucky. We take food for granted. And then you go to other parts of the world, Kenya, they pay just about half of their income for food. Nigeria, even more than half. So about 2 billion people in the world don't have that reality of the grocery store where we can buy affordable food. For instance, I'm going to show you some markets from around the world. This is a market in Liberia. And Liberia is a place where they pay a lot of their income for food. And you go to this market and you can buy potatoes, or you can buy potatoes. And this is northern Ethiopia. And you can get chat, which is a leaf that you chew that takes away your hunger, or you can get chat. Even the goats are eating chat at this market. And here's a market in Mali, which is a place that's very food insecure. And you can go to the market and you can get millet, or you can get millet. You get the idea. Here's Ghana. Yes, we have bananas today, and we don't have anything else. So that's all examples of vegetables and fruits that you can buy. But what about the meat? I want to tell you that in my travels, I've come to realize that meat can be a pretty big deal. You know, in the developed world, we're always saying, oh, you eat too much meat. We all eat too much meat. It's a big problem. It makes us sick. And we should not encourage other people in other lands to eat more meat. However, there are a lot of places where they don't have enough meat. This is a picture from Afghanistan, where I have worked on multiple occasions helping veterinarians to recognize disease in sheep and goats. We did some necropsy training. Necropsy is autopsy on an animal. We did necropsy trainings for veterinarians where we bought sheep and goats and slaughtered them and did the necropsy. Well, the people who worked in the lab were just so thrilled whenever we came to do these workshops, because they said, oh boy, we get meat today. So they would take the carcass down to the kitchen, and instead of just the beans and rice that were served every day to the employees in the laboratory, they would actually get some meat. They were just very happy to have that because of the meat poor diet. And here are some of the veterinarians that we trained. Afghanistan had many years of severe conflict, and the veterinarians were not sufficiently trained because they couldn't get to the university, or they were drafted into the army, or they went to another country. And so we helped the veterinarians in learning how to do a necropsy and recognizing lesions. The veterinarian in the middle, the one who was pulling back the skin with his right hand, was a young veterinarian when I first went there, and he is now the chief veterinary officer of the country. We have connected again on LinkedIn. Another question is the food safe? So look at this plastic canvas that has animal blood on it, and it's holding some vegetables. Well, you can get enough to eat, but if it's not safe, then you're not going to absorb any nutrients because it's all going to run out the hind end. As I'm sure many of you know, you've experienced food poisoning before. So what is the scale of food insecurity? If we look at this graph, you can see how many people in the world are food insecure. The orange line is the number of people who are food insecure, and the gray line is the percentage of the world population that is food insecure. So at least 11% of the global population is food insecure, and that is more than 800 million people. And then there's probably another there's probably another billion, yes, billion and a bit. I have trouble with numbers. Billion and a bit who are on the cusp of food insecurity, who don't quite get enough, but they're not fully classified as food insecure. You can see that there have been some increases up to 2015, 2016, and it's continuing to increase. And this is largely due to conflict, displaced people that we have in many parts of the world, and that is on the increase. If you look at some of the most food insecure countries in the world, you will see that many of them are suffering from conflict or climate change. So those two factors are driving up the number of people who are food insecure. What does food insecurity mean? Well, the UN talks about the 4 pillars of food security, which are, is the food available? Can you get to it? And if you get to it, can you pay for it? Is it stable? That is it healthy? Is it wholesome? Is it contaminated? And lastly, utilization. So let's go through those 4. If the food is not available, that means it isn't. You can't get to it. Or if you get to it, you can't pay for it. And access to food is the second one. Then we have the utilization, which has to do with how your body is actually able to use what comes into it. Oh, excuse me. Here we go. Yes. And lastly, it is the stability. The 4th pillar is the stability. And this means there's no threat of the other 3 happening from season to season or year to year. So we'll go through these 3 pillars and then tie them together with the last one. Food is not available. A big problem with food not being available has to do with climate shocks, with droughts and floods, which we are seeing more and more of. This was a big problem in East Africa in the recent year, where there are many countries in East Africa where numerous people became food insecure because of droughts. How about the distribution system? Here's a picture from South Sudan. And again, this is the distribution system, which means the food is not getting to the market. But the reason it can't get to the market is because of a climate shock and flooding in South Sudan. Or perhaps in northern Ethiopia, the food can't get to the market because there's a camel disease. How about no access to food? This is a very big area, and it has to do with extreme poverty and also conflict occurring. This is from a place in Ethiopia, and as you can see, these children are very poor. I'm sure their mother does not have any money to actually get them the food that they need. Food insecurity is a big issue in Ethiopia. Now, food security has also been targeted towards women. If you look at this graph from the Economist Intelligence Unit, the maroon boxes are the percentages of women involved in agriculture in the different countries. And the blue is access to financing for farmers. So if they have access, it's 100%. As you see in the developed countries, very few women are working in agriculture. But then if you go over to the other side of the bar graph, you will see that a large percentage, usually the majority of people working in agriculture are women, but they have no access to financing. So I'm thinking that, this could be the new Me Too movement for agriculture, to make sure that women get their due. Because providing women with the means for agriculture, they can get the education, skills, and finances they need to actually be successful and feed their families and really improve global food security. A big issue is conflict. If you look at this graph, you can see tremendous increases in conflict, both non-state violence and state violence, since the 2010, 2012. And this continues. Displaced people are historically, they have a lot of difficulty getting to the food. So we've got 11 million displaced people from Syria, 6 million from Iraq. And 75% of the stunted children in the world actually live in countries that are in conflict. In conflict, people are not only displaced, but there can be inadequate distribution of the resources. Or maybe there's a takeover of resources. The smallholders lose their chickens to the militia that comes in, or someone steals the goat out of the pasture, and so on. Or there's danger in going to the market because there are armed forces there. Conflict has been a huge problem. These pictures are from Liberia. This is the two little boys on the bottom left are in an orphanage. There's a huge number of orphans in Liberia. And as you know, there was conflict in Liberia for many years. And Charles Taylor actually had the child soldiers, where he would draft boys out of the villages and give them drugs and have them go do horrible crimes. And many of these boys, soldier boys, are now grown. The picture on the top is of a man who works at the orphanage. He can never go back to his home village because he was one of those boy soldiers who committed atrocities. So if you think of all of the horrible things that happened in Liberia during those years of civil war, all of the food got consumed. There was really nothing to eat. So it's not surprising that Liberians would turn to bushmeat for sustenance. And then look what happened in 2013, 2014. We had an outbreak of Ebola due to consumption of bushmeat. So telling people not to eat bushmeat is not, you can't really do that unless you actually know the context in which it has occurred. Violent extremism this is something that all countries are really worried about because, of course, we have a big increase in violent extremism globally. Now, how does food security fit with this? For people to join violent extremist organizations, there are both push factors and pull factors. And the problems of poverty and malnutrition fit into these. If we look at Maslow's hierarchy, so this is a hierarchy of human needs. At the bottom, there's food, water, shelter, reproduction. Well, if there's not enough food and there's no job, so there's no marriage and no reproduction, it's easy to see how people would want to fill this basic need by going into an extremist organization that promises some stability and sustenance. Same with personal security, employment. So those are the push factors. And then we have the pull factors, which are closer to the top. If people feel that they have no future, they have no self-esteem, no status, no sense of connection, those are the pull factors that bring young men and women into violent extremist organizations. This is something that many governments are very interested in stemming the tide of new recruits to violent extremist organizations. I've been involved with some military courses that help to train veterinarians to go into some of these areas where there is capacity for recruitment to violence, and to help the farmers with their animals to actually help to grow the commercial enterprise a little bit more so that people have more money, they have more food. And this is a picture of Major Rick Tucker, who is helping the Tuareg camel herders in the Lake Chad Basin. And he's been quite successful in improving the economy of these Tuareg herders by improving the health of the camels. If we look at areas in Africa where there is recruitment to violent extremist organizations, you can see that the Lake Chad Basin is a big hot spot for that. So the US government is investing in helping to decrease that recruitment as a matter of national security. Then we go on to poor utilization. And this has two parts. The first part is what's called environmental enteric dysfunction, or some people call it environmental enteropathy. This has been credited for being the cause of stunting in children around the world. Most recently, it is animal feces that are blamed for this stunting. And it's said that children who live in close contact with livestock are getting something from the animal feces that is causing this enteropathy, which hinders absorption of nutrients. It's not yet shown that it's animal feces. In fact, it may be some kind of parasite, or maybe it's even a micronutrient deficiency that promotes this. And so the research in this area is very active now. It's an area of great interest to me because if it is proven that it's animal feces, then making sure that the poorest people in the world actually have animal source foods to eat is going to become more problematic. Well, what do I mean by animal source foods? So here's a little boy in Mali. He lives very close to his chickens and a couple of goats. And he may develop environmental enteropathy, and he has trouble actually absorbing nutrients. It's important that children get some form of animal source foods each and every day. Quite a few studies have been done where they have given school children, a glass of milk every day or an egg a day, and it has made a remarkable change in their abilities in school. We know that children really need animal source foods a little bit every day until they are fully grown. It's especially important in the first 1,000 days of life. Some people have called this hidden hunger, maybe because that term is easier to grasp than micronutrient deficiency. But it is a micronutrient deficiency. It's needed in the pregnant mother, and it's needed for the first 2 and a bit years of life. We now know that it is responsible for major cognitive stunting. We used to think that it just meant that children came up short in stature, but now we know that in fact their brains never fully develop. So this is a huge problem for entire nations, and the World Bank has estimated that because of this cognitive stunting, the gross domestic product of an entire generation can be 10% less. We know that micronutrients are in the most bioavailable form only in animal source foods. Now, people may say, oh, but I eat a lot of vegetables and we'll just give them more rice, but the micronutrients might be in the plants, but the phytates in plants inhibit the effective uptake. So it's far more efficient to actually give the children some animal source food every day. We cannot ignore that. I'm afraid that in a Western-centric view, where we tend to see meat as something that we should not be eating, that we tend to think we're eating too much, we need to be careful because it's not true for the 2 billion people living in food insecurity or on the cusp of food insecurity. So we've discussed food not being available. We've discussed no access to the food. And now we've just covered inability to utilize what's needed either because of the enteropathy or lack of micronutrients. And then that last pillar of food security is stability. I have it now. I have access to it now. It's available. I'm utilizing it now. Will the same be true in the fall of next year? So finding a way to permanently solve food security so we don't go from crisis to crisis is really essential. We can do it. The food system is a global system. We all need to work together. we should not separate the haves from the have-nots. And also, we really need to help the haves understand the complexity of problems facing the have-nots. Our shared future really depends on it. I thank you for listening. I thank you for attending. And I am now willing to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Brown, for a very, very interesting presentation. So I just want to remind everyone that if you do have questions, please type your questions in the chat box to the right, and we will fill those questions. In the meantime, we do have some additional questions that have come in, so I will start with those. The first question is that there was recently a confirmation of a mad cow in the UK. And from your perspective, what is the danger of such an outbreak there? And what is the risk of a similar outbreak in other cattle-producing countries around the world?
Bovine spongiform encephalopathy is the technical term for mad cow disease. And I always have felt like mad cow disease is not an appropriate moniker because, in fact, these cows are very sad. They're not mad. What we are seeing now, we have completely eliminated, I believe, from the world the bovine spongiform encephalopathy that was due to feeding of animal protein back to animals, ruminant protein back to animals. The entity of bovine spongiform encephalopathy is similar to the human entity of encephalopathy, spongiform encephalopathy, in that 1 in, I don't know how many million, will spontaneously develop that disease. So I think we will continue to see one animal here, one animal there, but an outbreak is very unlikely to happen because we no longer feed ruminant protein back to ruminants.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is, what is the most dangerous disease threatening food production in the world? And does the danger vary from region to region?
Thank you for that question. Right now, perhaps the disease that threatens food security the most is Peste des Petits Ruminants, or PPR, which is a viral disease infecting sheep and goats, causing significant mortality or death. This disease is closely related to the disease Rinderpest, which was plague of cattle, which we eradicated from the world with an effective vaccine. Great success story. Now PPR is spreading in many parts of the world where they raise abundant sheep and goats and depend on these animals for their livelihoods and food. We have a vaccine. We could eradicate it, but it will take a global effort. We have yet to see the countries of the world actually step forward and say, okay, we're going to commit funds to combat this. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Organization for Animal Health, OIE, have formed a joint task force to address this problem, but the funding is not significant enough to stop the spread.
Okay, our next question is, can you expand on the expected impacts of climate change on food production, especially how it affects agricultural production versus forage production?
I'm not sure I can comment reliably on that. I'm not a climatologist and I'm not a plant scientist. So I don't know. I have probably read the same review articles that the questioner has read. There are going to be changes. They're not all predictable yet.
Okay, we have another question. Which organizations stick out as doing the best work in food security right now? And who should we be watching for innovative approaches to addressing the pillars?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm involved with USAID programs, and they are using excellent metrics to ensure that the increase in food production is sustainable. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations is heavily involved in this, and I would say that their efforts are well placed. For others, I don't know.
Okay. Next question is, what is the most efficient source of animal protein to produce, and which is the safest?
Best animal protein, probably an egg, has everything in it, and eggs are generally safe. Chicken. In terms of nutrition, eggs are excellent and safe. In terms of efficiency of production, chickens lead the way in terms of how the food is turned into edible nutrition for humans. Fish are also very good, but for the fish, it just takes much longer. There's a time factor. Then the ruminants that are grazing on non-arable land are also very efficient.
Okay, we have another question that says, what would it take for the developing world to be able to enter the global meat export market, assuming they can reach adequate levels of production?
Yes, so the World Organization for Animal Health, the OIE, interprets the WTO standards for safe trade, this sanitary and phytosanitary agreement. The World Trade Organization made the sanitary and phytosanitary agreement, and then the OIE, World Organization for Animal Health, took that agreement and turned it into 2,800 pages of recommended standards for global trade. So in order for a country to trade, they have to show that they meet the standards of freedom from disease that are outlined in those OIE manuals and codes. It's doable. We have seen countries actually move into good export trade by improving the health of their animal industries. Brazil is an excellent example. Also, South Africa has done it. Other countries could follow suit. It requires a pretty strong political will and usually some donor assistance.
Thank you. Dr. Brown, I actually have a question. One of the things that we focused on in GHSA is really raising issues to the level that they are considered a national level priority, and in most cases encouraging funding to go along with this. And I know this is something that you repeatedly mentioned in your talks. And so I just wanted to know your perspective, especially as food security continues to be a growing problem, whether it's access to food or just the economic cost of accessing food. What do you think are some steps that could be taken to actually continue to raise this as a national level priority that has funding attached to it?
So when you say national level priority, do you mean from a donor perspective or a developing country perspective?
Developing country perspective.
Oh, how to raise, I would have to think about that for a while, Dr. Hoyle. Food is central, but usually the people who are in power don't worry about food because they have enough.
Yes.
So it has to be, the problem of poverty actually has to be brought to the attention of the policymakers. Oh, and you know, this a business of cognitive stunting could be very helpful here. If it's going to decrease the country's GDP by 10%, I should think that would be something that would grab policymakers' attention.
Absolutely. So connecting it to long-term economic productivity.
Yes.
Sure. Okay, we have another question. Says, what can we as the next generation do to help address food insecurity from our regions or from a cross-regional perspective?
Is food an integral part, food and nutrition, are they part of the GHSA?
In certain ways, yes. It's not explicitly called out as as a particular action package, but I would think that it's an underlying theme.
Yes, I think looking at the recent literature on nutrition, stunting, and the whole idea of hunger has changed in recent years. Hunger used to be, well, are you getting sufficient calories? And now we know that you can get sufficient calories and still be very stunted or obese because you're not getting the right nutrients that allow you to utilize and grow properly.
Okay, so your perspective is to try to raise it more as an issue under the GHSA.
I think that was the question asked by the, it was the question you just posed, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And then another question is, what are the cross-disciplinary areas of expertise most needed to address food insecurity?
We need the sociologists and the anthropologists talking together with the health professionals for both plants and animals. There are many issues that are thorny, and they can't be solved without the social scientists. Getting the economists in there is also helpful. Unfortunately, we're all happiest talking in our own silos. But if we look at the other disciplines, get the medical people talking to the rural sociologists, I think we can make progress a lot faster.
Awesome, thank you. Are there any other questions from the line? If you do have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box.
All right. If there are no other questions, I would like to sincerely thank Dr. Brown. It is such a treat to be able to listen to a lecture from you again, for me, and then for everybody else to get to hear from you for the first time. You have our undying gratitude, and thank you for such a wonderful, wonderful talk. I'm sure everybody learned a lot. I know I did. For everybody on the line, upcoming events for NextGen. We will have our mentorship program flash conference in December. The date is to be determined. And look upcoming for a webinar about the flash conference and what's surrounding that. If you were not in the mentorship program this year and are interested, we will be starting up another round. So keep an eye on your inbox for that as we send out the call for applications probably before the end of the year or early in the new year. Thank you all so much for attending. Dr. Brown, thank you so much for giving us your talk, and we will all see you next time.
Thank you for all you do.
Thanks so much.
Make the world a better place.